From religion to wrestling, gumbo to grits, politics to poetry, and all things Southern in between, this is Take on the South. Produced by the Institute for Southern Studies and hosted by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Carolina, Take on the South examines the highs and lows of the American South, examines the truths and fictions of the country's most distinctive region, and picks the brains of some of its most accomplished students. To understand the South, you need to take it on, and that's what we'll be doing. Join us as we take on the South. Every major university needs an official historian, and we are lucky to have a fabulous one. Today we are joined by Dr. Evan Faulkenbury, who is the official historian of the University of South Carolina. He previously worked at the State University of New York in Cortland, where he was an associate and an assistant professor. He has his BA from Liberty University, his MA from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and his PhD from the very prestigious and wonderful Southern Studies University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Evan, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mark. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure entirely. Before we get going, and I want to talk about your background and where you're from and what have you, could you tell us what is an official historian of a university?
Right. Well, that's a great question. What I'm trying to figure out myself, because no one has been in this role before, although there have been many people that have been doing USC history for a long, long time. There aren't many universities or colleges that have an official historian. Mm-hmm. There might be some historians there who do it in a de facto sense, who might be in the history department. But from what I understand, between 2019 2021, here at USC, there was the President's Commission on University History. And that was a multi-year project to understand names on buildings and some of the larger context of the history of this place back to 1801. And out of the recommendations in the final report was to think about, well, why don't we have someone devoted to thinking about university history? And when I saw the job come across the description, it appealed to me because it was a job in public history. And that's my background, and that's what I write about and research and what I taught. And this job as university historian is to interpret history for a larger public, not just kind of an internal write reports and write books no one's going to read, but rather like history for the masses about this special place that so many are already attached to.
So you're kind of gesturing towards the difference between an historian and a public historian. Could you unpack that just a bit more? I'm hearing that the public historian is a bit more expansive, but are there any other differences?
I think so. So I didn't know what public history was until graduate school, and then I quickly got the sense that it's nothing too complicated. The way that I explained it to my students is that public history is history for people who don't like history. And those are those people who they're not going to take history classes in college any more than they have to. They're not going to read large books, and that's okay. But they might love watching a movie like Gladiator 2 and the history of Rome. They might like watching documentaries. They might like listening to podcasts about history, or going to museums or historic sites or tourism, that kind of thing. That's public history. History that is shaped in a way for public consumption. It's not like dumbed down or watered down or anything, but it's tailored in a way that more people can identify with. So,
I see the catchment as bigger and actually more interesting, right? I mean, let's just face it, it's interesting, right? People listen to podcasts, they watch movies, and that's how you engage them. And perhaps they might end up in a straight history track, or they continue down the public history path. So, can you tell me, when you were up in New York, were you teaching public history there?
I was. That was the job. When I was at North Carolina working on my PhD, I worked in the Southern Oral History program and oral history, but it was also public history. And so with that background, I got up there to SUNY Cortland, and the job was teach public history to undergraduates because one of the reasons we want to have history undergrads graduate with a larger skill set
Yep.
because they might not all become historians
Yeah.
or teachers even. They so how do you apply these skills? Well, one way is to funnel it through public history. So rather than just read and write and research and write reports, what if we work with a museum? Or what if we work with a historic site to build an exhibit, to do an oral history project, to do a walking tour, something like that? And then they're gathering these other skills that can be applied to different areas.
That's interesting because the University of South Carolina has a very sort of distinguished lineage in public history. I think originally it was called applied history.
That's right.
And then it became public history.
That's right.
Which I think is actually a better description. But it is an application of skill, right?
No doubt. I think that was the origin of it in the 1970s when that term became popular. But yeah, USC is one of the first places where public history became something you could study and become a professional in.
And also very marketable, right? I mean, one of your points here is that if you want a job in the history profession, it's hard. If you're going for a straight tenure track job, which are increasingly rare, difficult to secure, think about public history as an alternative because there are many museums, archives. I've had students who graduated with me but had a public history background, a public history track, and they're now working in Washington at various archives. It opens up your world rather than closes it down.
Exactly. Way more job opportunities, way more places to get your foot in the door than there is in a kind of typical academic type job hunt.
Yeah.
Whether it's historic sites, museums, places big and small like Washington, New York, but also local historical societies are in every county in the country, and they all need people to work there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Evan, you are from the South originally, correct?
That is right.
You can't hear it, but you are.
Yeah, I don't know. My accent comes out at certain points in time.
Is that right?
Yes, most commonly when I'm watching Tar Heel basketball.
Well, of course it should, right? It should.
And now Gamecock basketball.
And now go quickly add Gamecock basketball
and all the things.
So you're from where originally?
I grew up in Concord, North Carolina.
Okay.
And born in Louisiana, lived a few years there, lived a few years in Texas, and then for the most part lived in North Carolina growing up.
And then you venture to the cold north.
I did. That was the place where I
culture shock much or not?
You know what? Maybe in a few ways. I'd never seen salt thrown across the roads, so regularly during the winter time.
Right.
Had never worn so much wool and LL Bean gear than I had while I was there. But honestly, people make a lot of, Yankee differences and, the rudeness of Northerners. I heard that all the time in the South, and but I think that's more just made up. Sometimes people are maybe a little more honest or maybe a little bit more brash with their opinion, but not in a rude way. Whereas Southerners sometimes we like to hide our truest intentions behind the veneer of passive aggressiveness or that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I understand. So let's circle back just a bit. You started here not that long ago in August 2024. So that was last semester, your first semester. You've been very busy since you arrived. Can you tell us what you've been doing really in the first 6 months?
I can. So when I started as historian here, I had to quickly learn the history. So that's one of the first things. And like I mentioned earlier, there have been a lot of people from the South Caroliniana to the history department to other departments across campus to the library who have been documenting USC history for a long, long time. So I've just been trying to pick up what they've already been working on and absorb it, and then try to create new public history outlets for the future of that. So some of the variety of things I've been working on, I've got my phone here to go through the list in case I forget anything that I really want to mention. One is that I've been working on the podcast, Remembering the Days with Chris Horn. So
it's a great podcast. I really enjoy Remembering the Days, yeah.
Thank you for the plug. So Chris Horn started this back in 2020, all about USC history. And so I've joined with him to continue the podcast indefinitely, and hopefully for a long, long time to come. I've been working on an exhibit about the McBride dormitories because McBride is right behind Thomas Cooper Library, and it is scheduled to be demolished in spring of 2026.
Yes.
And it was built in 1955 and has this quirky, weird history where it has a reputation on campus.
Mm-hmm.
But soon it's not going to be here anymore. And as I understand, not too long ago, there were some other dorms that were knocked down, the honeycombs.
Yep. Oh, I remember them. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were gone, and people still have a lot of nostalgia
They do.
around them. And so I think the same will be this similar for McBride. And so I'm trying to document that history.
I like this a great deal because lots of people were quite upset when the honeycombs came down and with such speed. So what happened? It's like an immediate evaporation of history. For lots of people who grew up and attended and lived in those dorms, this is a good thing to preserve that history and to give some kind of marker to it, right?
Right.
Good for you. Good for you.
Those dorms will be gone and new dorms will go in their place.
Yep.
And so you're right. When in the future, when people walk by, there won't be any realization that something else used to be there.
That's right.
This is the burden of history that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be a way to preserve and document that history and give a chance for people to interact with it before it goes away permanently.
Yep. Good.
So I've been working on that. I've been doing a lot of oral history interviews.
Mm-hmm.
So talking to people who shaped the institution's history in ways big and small. So trying to talk to people who, the big people in positions of authority, but also others who were students here and helped shape things. And so, for example, I've been interviewing people who lived in McBride and talked to one person who was like a resident director there back in the, I guess, late 2010s, something, or no, not early 2010s.
Yeah.
And to think about how, it's an all-male dorm and had a reputation on campus as being not very nice necessarily inside. The students there being a bit too boisterous, not a place where people want to go who don't live there. And so he talked in his oral history about creating these workshops with the students about, tackling hard issues like drugs and like sex and like alcohol and things like that, and kind of helping mature these students. And so the broader perspective that the McBride story will have is that it's not just buildings, but it's a place where people became men, became adults while they were here.
Right.
So oral history is a big part of it.
Good.
I also created a place for digital history to live. And of course, there's already places like that through the library and through various departments. But Bloomberg Connects is an app that Michael Bloomberg of Bloomberg Philanthropies has created for museums and historic sites to put in digital exhibits, digital tours, things like that. So I've built that up for the university where future stuff can live. I've been leading tours. I've been trying to create a kind of LibGuide or bibliography of all the previous USC history that's been done beforehand. So there can be kind of a one-stop shop for people who were doing this history with me. So that's a little sampling.
All right, that's a lot. Let me just ask you this. So you come on board and you've got this massive history of an institution that is quite old, 1801. I'm just curious, did you start now and read back, or did you start in 1801 and read forward?
I think it's been more scattershot.
Okay, all right, because you wouldn't, if you started in 1801, you might be in 1820 by now, so you're kind of picking at things, right?
Exactly. It's not chronological in order. I've just been trying to pick up what others have been doing. So a lot of the early books on USC history by Maximilian Laborde and Edwin Green and Harry Lassane and others, theirs is more chronological. Hollis is another one who wrote a two-volume history in the 50s. So looking at those, but then kind of just seeing where there are gaps, I suppose.
Yeah.
What are, so in some of those early histories by Laborde and Green, there's very little on Reconstruction, for example.
Right.
And what is there is very much like, it's whispered
lament
about.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
The radical rule, that kind of thing. And so beginning to think about, okay, well, what else can we do about the history of Reconstruction here? And of course, there have already been some great efforts on campus these last several years to remember that. So just kind of going with the flow with what's already been going on.
No, I think it makes perfect sense. You interviewed Harry Lassane recently.
Yeah.
I remember when Harry was writing that book. It's probably the most recent history of the university.
Yeah.
What did Harry say about gaps? Did he think there were gaps, or how did he see a revised version of USC history?
Right, right. Well, I think he could see the way that he charted his book was to begin to see how around the 1940s, USC exploded in a way that it hadn't before. Whereas before that, it was a tiny, tiny, tiny little place.
Mm-hmm.
Really, even after in the into the 20th century, several decades in, it was only in the post-war era that it began to grow. So before that, there weren't so many gaps,
Right, right.
except when you look at people who were not allowed on campus.
Right, right. Big gap. Yeah, yeah.
Big gap. So, of course, women, Black Americans, Indigenous Americans, So, and then later in the 20th century, the gaps are going to continue to be, from what Lassane was looking at, we have department histories, we have the presidents. So we kind of have a heavier top-down approach, I suppose. But we can have, in the old language of social history, what about the bottom up? So looking at more students, more student movements, more student groups, more things happening on campus that might not have been documented so well with a paper trail. Right. Places we can go in the future.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And you're right, it has exploded. Do you happen to know, if you don't, it's fine, I'm just curious, do you know what the student population was in 1950 of USC and what it is today?
I can't give you the exact numbers, but I think in the 1960s and then in the early 70s, it really just kind of blew up.
Yeah.
And so at that time, they were just building like crazy, new buildings, all over, like McBride, just throwing up buildings everywhere, more and more students coming in, GI Bill money, and, the post-war boom, all that sort of thing. So the numbers rose very fast.
And we're going through a kind of second renaissance on this, aren't we? Because I've been here almost 30 years, and I don't recall the university building this quickly, this much in those 30 years. I mean, the footprint of the campus has got to have been doubled since I came here in, 1989.
Right.
Parts of the university were simply uninhabited, especially down towards the rivers. Like nobody was there.
Right.
It was just a parking lot with a Coliseum. That was it. And now it's everywhere.
Right. I think now we're over 38,000 students total, and it's just going to keep going up and up and up.
What are you doing with satellite campuses? Are you working with them, or is that something that you're going to have to deal with down the road? Because we have a bunch of satellite campuses at USC, and one of the points of a state university, just like SUNY Cortland, right, is you've got to go to where population centers are. They're not all in Columbia.
Right.
Are you working in any of those spaces?
Not yet, but I hope to down the road. Yeah, I know there's 8 schools.
It's a lot.
8 different histories.
It's a lot.
Right. But each one, their own imprint, valid in their own right, their own histories. It's been fun to follow some of them just through social media and that kind of thing. Like, for example, I'll give a shout out to at USC Lancaster. They have a wonderful Native American Studies program and museum. And so, things like that I hope to coordinate with more in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some that were part of the USC system that then were out of the USC system.
Right.
Francis
like
Marion.
Marion, yeah.
So that's a whole nother story there, it seems to me. Okay, so you're very busy. You've got this tranche of evidence and archives to go through, and you're going to be finding all sorts of things that other people haven't seen. And we are in need of this history, and we're in need of revision. I think this is a very healthy thing for the university. What's the most challenging part of your job?
Probably, and I think this will be temporary, is just, I didn't go to USC.
Right.
I'm not an alum.
Yep.
And I'm not even I'm from the wrong Carolina.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. So just picking it up.
Yeah.
And familiarizing myself with the sources, the people, the personalities, and coming in with kind of an outsider's point of view and being able to kind of see things as they've been done, but then trying to put them through a kind of public history tunnel, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it's not a challenge in that it's, not in the negative sense, but that's one that I think is just going to take the most runway.
Yeah.
To be able to familiarize myself with the lingo, the sources, what what all do we have in the Caroliniana?
Mm-hmm.
What all do we have in university archives? We have someone who's been here for a long time, Elizabeth West,
Mm-hmm.
who's been keeping the records and, it's figuring out what we have and what we can tell that hasn't been told before, even
Yeah.
though we have the records here. It's how do we get the records into public view in these different storytelling ways.
Yeah, so it's kind of cataloging and learning what you have, and presumably also listening to the silences of what you don't have, right?
Right. Exactly.
I mean, there are holes where there isn't much of a paper trail. Right?
Exactly.
That's probably quite a challenge in and of itself, isn't it?
It's fun though. I mean, historians, we learn this is kind of what we're trained in doing.
Yeah.
So even just today, I mean, this might end up as a total dead end, but today I was looking at some of the old Sanborn maps from the late 1800s, these fire insurance maps of Columbia, because I just found like the vaguest of references of someone who used to live or at least bought property in what's now or what was like the site of the old parade ground, which is where the fountain is now in front of Thomas Cooper.
Right.
So in way past times, that was an open field, and then before that, in Reconstruction, that's where the Union Army drilled.
Yeah.
When they were here after they had occupied Columbia in February 1865. And then during Reconstruction, apparently, a black man in Columbia owned property right off there. I don't know if I'm going to be able to trace it all the way through, but that's part of the challenge of the job and part of the fun of it, to try to think, if that property existed and if I can find records of this person, that would be right there on the corner of where Thomas Cooper Library is now, where so many students are every single day. But what used to be there, that's part of our history too, but it's not yet known.
Right. Literally underwater. Yeah. All right. It seems to me that this position is endless. Like, you're never going to run out of things to find or talk about, which I think is a really healthy thing. Project yourself 5 years from now. What do you see yourself doing? I know it's difficult because you're still learning about the place, but what kinds of things do you see the USC historian doing in 5 years from now?
Right. Well, I want to publish books.
Yep. Okay.
So I want to keep documenting that story. That's something that's going to live a long, long time. And exhibits are great. Public history is great. That's what I'm going to be doing a lot of as well. But for something to stand the test of time, like exhibits fade away.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Books eventually fade away too, but they last a little bit longer. So I want to do more publishing and things like that. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, this is where I want to be for decades on end. And you're right, endless stories.
Yeah.
So be able to publish more, find those gaps, and write more about USC's history, I think will be fun. Probably not in the way that previous historians have done, kind of like a this date to this date, chronological in order, because it's already been done up to the year 2000. And I just don't know if I'm the right person to do it in that kind of way. But what are some people who haven't been written about enough yet here? What are some events that have happened here? So more like targeted stories in that kind of sense. And ultimately, my goal for that, for writing and for public history, and one of the things that drew me to this job too when I came for a visit was, it's kind of like what I said earlier, public history is history for people who don't like history. Students who go here, alumni, people who go through here, people who are from South Carolina who didn't even go to college here, but who support the Gamecocks.
Mm-hmm.
There's already a strong sense of history about this place. Yeah. So my job is to help kind of like fill in the specifics. Yeah. So to kind of help form that Gamecock identity even more so around our history, our collective history, and helping people see that they're also part of this history too.
Good. Yeah, I mean, you're a prolific author. You've written loads of articles. You've got, your big book with Chapel Hill in 2019, your edited collection. I know you're working on other stuff. I think it's absolutely important that in your position, a book is published or, on these things. Just out of curiosity, and I'd really appreciate your thoughts on this. Does a public historian have a different writing voice than a non-public historian?
I'm always trying to tweak my voice, and I don't know. I think I probably am still, I was trained how to write a dissertation.
Yeah,
So
right.
perhaps that's stuck with me too much. But I try to read more travel writers, uh, public historians who have written before, people who don't identify as public historians.
Right.
That's more of our term for them. But some of the authors like Tony Horowitz,
Yeah.
Clint Smith, who has written some wonderful stuff like How the Word Is Passed, who have visited historic sites and are writing about like the meaning of this history for today. That's what I try to get at. And I'm working on a book now that is not about USC history, but is one that I started a couple of years ago and that I'm determined to finish, even though I'm in this new position. And in fact, I have to finish it because I signed the contract with USC Press.
Well, you have to now, don't you?
And they're not far, and they know where I am.
They can find
easily
you.
come get me. But it's about public history and slave rebellions in America. And so how historic sites and museums and public historians have remembered Nat Turner's rebellion and John Brown's raid and things like that. And so when I've been writing that, I don't know if it's going to work or not, but been trying to write in a way where it's more of a, what's the right word? More of a sensory experience, I guess.
Sure.
Trying to put myself there as well.
Right. Well, if anybody can do it, you can do it. Evan, if people want to get hold of you, where's the best place to do that?
Right. Well, I have started up the Facebook and the Instagram, and you can find me at USC Historian.
Okay.
You can email me, evanfaulkenbury@sc.edu. My office is in Thomas Cooper Library. And I want to hear from people. What are some stories that need to be told more about USC history? What are some ways I can help dig it up and work with others?
Evan Faulkenbury, thank you for everything that you do for the university, and thank you for being on Take on the South.
Thank you.
That was our Take on the South. Let us know yours. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at U of SC South. Take on the South is produced by Matt Simmons of the Institute for Southern Studies. Special thanks to Professor Dave Garner of the University of South Carolina School of Music for composing our music. Tune in next time for another Take on the South.